Imagine a spaceship flying through the stars. Picture yourself in the control room. You're at the helm of the ship. The controls are in front of you. You've got the panels and screens, instruments and dials. And through the window, a blue planet looms below. So picture that control room. What does it look like? How many windows are there? What's on the screens? Were you picturing something futuristic like this? I was picturing something more retro, like this. Maybe you were imagining it based off of something you already know, something straight out of science fiction. Or maybe it was based on reality, something a little closer to home. Every single one of you was picturing something different. Everybody has different experiences and memories, and that shapes our perspective. But the ability to see the same thing, that's what XR can get us. I'm Kelles Gordge. I work at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab. I'm part of the US Navy's Tactical Advancements for the Next Generation, or TANG program. As a mechanical engineer, I love hardware and prototyping. And as an XR developer, I love building virtual prototypes to bring ideas to life.
And I'm Wade Lewis. As the TANG program's immersive technology lead, I drive the design and development of our XR experiences to bring human-centered solutions to life. So what do we do at the TANG program? Well, we are a multi-organizational US Navy program, and we tackle what we call gnarly challenges with human-centered design. So we bring 3 different perspectives together, talking to technical experts like you all, and blending that expertise with an understanding of what's realistic from the decision makers or our stakeholders, and an understanding of what it's like to be in the field, to do that firsthand knowledge from our warfighters. And what we've seen over every single project is that at the center of when all of these 3 groups converge, when they're at the same table having a conversation, that's when real impact happens. And that's when we can make solutions that really make a difference.
When you're building something for the user, you need to understand their experience. And the best way to understand something is to experience it for yourself. That's empathy. Our team goes out in the field. We go on research trips and talk to the warfighter. We want to understand not just what they do, but how they do it. And what is that really like? We want to know what systems they use. What gear do they wear? It's one thing to hear that they wear gear and a helmet in the cockpit of an aircraft, but it's another thing to put that helmet on and feel the weight as it pulls your head forward. When you do that, it builds empathy. And man, that'll change your perspective.
So we have found that XR has this amazing ability to rapidly merge ideas and different perspectives with new ways to experience them.
XR builds a collective understanding. It's an amazing storytelling tool that allows us to build empathy and see things from a new perspective.
XR transforms ideas into a shared perspective, taking things that are just in your head, and we can turn them into something tangible, something that you can reach out and grab, something that we can experience together.
And XR accelerates the feedback and iteration process, driving the design forward, allowing us to build something that makes it to the field, a high-impact solution together.
So today, we're going to show you how we use XR to do these 3 things.
Stories help us understand. The best stories paint a picture. Sometimes you can picture yourself really there. XR takes us to the next level because now we can tell immersive stories, and that changes our conversation.
So one of my favorite stories centers around creating the bridge of the future for surface ships in the US Navy. Now, as somebody who has never been in the Navy, somebody who previous to this had never been on a surface ship, I had no idea where to start. I mean, it's kind of scary, right? I didn't even know what a bridge looked like. But we had the opportunity to go underway on the USS Essex LHD-2 for 2 weeks, traveling from San Diego out to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. And wow, was it an incredible experience. Standing side by side with the warfighters, getting to experience the things that they do on a daily basis. Not just what it takes to navigate the ship, but what it actually is like for those sailors each and every single day. Seeing the same things that they're seeing, experiencing it, using the same gear is incredible. And many of those moments have stuck with me ever since. Sometimes that look like waking up early for things like flight operations, getting to see aircraft take off or land on the flight deck. But it wasn't just that. It was also about what it took to make this happen on the bridge, and how sometimes the smallest things, like the direction of the ship or the direction of the wind, changes, and it makes it that much harder or easier for pilots to land or take off from the flight deck. But other moments looked like staying up late to get a personal lesson on what it takes to actually steer the ship, to use that very helm console. And as a software developer, when I saw that, I didn't even know where to start.
And as a mechanical engineer, that's not like anything I've ever built.
But it was an incredible way to just sit there with the warfighter and ask them all sorts of questions about what each and every instrument does, what it's like to actually do this. So there is value in experiencing things for yourself. You build an understanding that is just otherwise, it's tough to achieve. But how can I get you all today to truly understand what this was like? I took a lot of pictures, and they turned out fantastic. Honestly, like way more pictures than we have time to go through in this presentation. But the thing is, what the pictures don't convey is just how hard this was. So here's a picture of me, and that's the rack that I slept in. You can see that there's not a lot of room. You can't even really sit up. And just below that, that is all the personal space that I had for 2 weeks for all of my clothes and shoes and everything else. That's hard. Imagine living that every single day. We were on our feet constantly. When you're on the bridge, you can't sit down. There's no chairs. And so we would stand there for several hours for a whole watch on the bridge. And you can even see it in this picture. I'm not standing straight, right? I'm kind of taking the weight off of one foot because we had been on the bridge earlier that morning and then finally watching flight ops for about another 2 to 3 hours. So imagine what that's like for those warfighters who wake up every single day and spend 4 hours on watch on the bridge with 1 or 2 hands on the steering wheel at all times. They have to be focused on all of the different instruments in front of them, right? This is hard. And so we wanted to bring a taste of what this was like back to our team, right? Because we took a small team underway. Unfortunately, we couldn't bring everybody. So we created a virtual reality experience where you could step through various personas and anybody could experience what it was like to be an officer on the bridge. So you could be a lookout, a helmsman, or an officer of the deck. We even played around with daytime versus nighttime to see how that changed things. But then we brought warfighters in to see if our understanding of what the bridge is actually like matched their reality. And so we got some great feedback. One of the first sailors who came in said, "Wow, this is my ship. How did you recreate my ship?" And at first we were like, well, wait a second, this is, we just thought this was like an average one. But she said, no, my ship, like she related to this. And then a couple weeks later, we had another warfighter who all of a sudden out of nowhere said, "Do I smell seawater?" Now, we certainly were not pumping the smell of seawater into the room.
Even though we joked about it a few times.
But it was an amazing way to really start to see how XR could resurface memories of something that they had previously experienced and make it that much more immersive for the warfighter. That's when we knew we might be onto something, right? So let's take it back to our team, and we said, what can we really learn from this?
The only thing I've ever driven is a car. And maybe I could sail a sailboat, but imagine driving a warship. And when I put on that virtual experience, now I could walk around the bridge of a ship. I could see what the lookout would see. I could stand where the helmsman would stand and see the controls and the dials. And then, when I was able to go onto a real bridge for the first time, it already felt familiar. I was able to talk to the lookout and talk to the helmsman and have a different conversation than I could have otherwise. And that changed my perspective.
So going on the Essex was an amazing way to capture what it's like today. And we came back and started looking through some different ideas for the bridge of the future. And that's when we realized the sailors themselves already had a bunch of really good ideas. So one of my favorite examples revolves around the windows. And so in that picture you can see there's the windows at the front. There's a bunch of consoles that are right lined up against it. And on the Essex, when we first walked onto the bridge, it was one of the very first things we noticed because the sailors had created these boxes that were about a foot tall for the sailors who were a little bit shorter. You could step up onto those and get a very clear picture out of what was happening in the distance. And it was even great for me because when flight operations would happen, I would step up onto that and look down onto the flight deck. But because of all those consoles, you couldn't really get close enough to easily do that without those boxes. Now, we love seeing designs like this because what it really communicates to us is probably not what we want to design in the future, but what the needs of the sailors actually are, the things that they need to do in order to accomplish their job. And so as we looked to bringing this back and started creating the next thing, we said, well, wait a second, XR can take all of these ideas that maybe it's something that the sailors had, or maybe it's something that our team saw, and we can transform those and blend those together into an experience that's tangible, something that we can actually all experience together. But the thing is, how do you design for something that doesn't exist? How do you design for something where no sailor has ever been on it, where there's no CAD model? Or maybe that sailor who is going to be on this, say for example, a future ship, they might not even be born yet, might not even be born for another 20 years. How do you design for something like that? So how can we take ideas and start visualizing them and turn them into reality?
When we're brainstorming, we need to break out of the "that's how we've always done it" mentality. And we know that a good idea can come from anyone. So when we bring in sailors, whether they're officers or enlisted, everybody's in casual clothes, nobody's in uniform. And when you have that idea, jot down just a few words on a sticky note and throw it up on the wall. Now it takes it from your head to something we can see. We can start to visually represent it. And an even better way to visually represent it is to make a sketch. Sketching allows us to start to picture the same thing together. And this is it can be simple. This is a pilot using futuristic technology to interface with their aircraft.
My sketches don't look that good.
And mine don't either. But the point is that this gets it from an idea in your head to something on a page that we can talk about. And when we start to prototype, now you can see it just start to come to life. This is a pilot modeling a futuristic haptic vest. But this is just construction paper and tape and an old painter suit that we got from the hardware store. This allows us to start to understand not just the idea, the intention behind it, and how the user would see themselves using it.
So after working with the warfighters to figure out what they really need, we can take this back to our team and start creating a higher fidelity version of those ideas. Now, these are fantastic because they're quick to make, quick to iterate on. If we decide we don't like the idea or it's not going to work, they're very fast to throw out. But most importantly, they're a great way to get feedback on something before we actually go and build it. And then we can start adding some things like personas or stories, similar to the lookout, the helmsman, the officer of the deck that we talked about before. In this case, what is this pilot accessing right now? What were they doing before this? What is their mission? And what do they need to do in the future? So as we start to think through this story, then we can create immersive experiences. But now we're actually taking that warfighter or the person who we're showing this concept to and putting them in the cockpit. We're not just showing them a 2D version. We're showing them a full interactive example of what they could be going through. Maybe that's something where they can click various toggles to see different types of information, or they can watch these sort of augmented reality rings as they pass through them to help them navigate. And we found that things like objectives and tasks and those stories are a great way to really figure out the context around all of the details so that we can really dive into all of the small things that make this idea work and find those moments that matter.
So throughout these different steps, we can see how an escalating level of fidelity allows us to take something that's just an idea in one person's head and bring it to life. And XR takes this to the next level because now we can build something interactive, an immersive prototype. An immersive prototype allows us to see the same thing. And now we can have a different conversation.
But the thing is, getting to a shared understanding is really just the beginning. Because XR changes how we get feedback, when we get feedback, and what we do with it, like how we drive that design forward.
There's a funny thing about feedback. The longer you work on something, the more you can start to fall in love with it. I do. But the more you fall in love with your idea, the harder it can be to accept change.
Now imagine that you just spent several years of your life and several $1 million creating what you think is the best product ever. And then you finally go to get that feedback. And what you hear is the users don't like it. It doesn't work for them, or they don't have a use case for it. Are you really going to be willing to accept the change that needs to happen? Maybe not. So obtaining good feedback is tough, especially something that you can work with, something real tangible. But what we found with XR is that if we, or when we, really get a user immersed in the experience, all of a sudden, it's like a switch flips. And they're on watch, doing all of the things that they're used to doing, their daily activities. It's no different. And then the quality of the feedback that we get increases exponentially. So many times in the XR industry, we talk about using virtual reality to transport the user to some new world. But if we're being honest, sometimes it's actually about taking you back to where you've already been. And then we can show them something new.
Like the bridge of a future ship. When we put the users in the headset, now they can picture themselves on watch, even though it's something they've never seen before. And we can start getting that effortless feedback. Not only that, but now we've seen people start to build on ideas, throwing new ideas out there that we can iterate on, even though it's something brand new. And we want to capture those good ideas, because like I said before, a good idea can come from anywhere. We want to engage the current warfighter as well as the future generation. And we can take our experience and show it to a child at Bring Your Child to Work Day, and also midshipmen at the Navy Yard. We can pack up a few headsets, a few computers, and take the show on the road, meeting the user where they are, and getting feedback at a pace we never could before.
So accelerating the pace that we get feedback also allows us to iterate on this design even faster. And we love to give the user the ability to iterate in real time while they're in the headset. So sometimes what that means is reaching out, grabbing an object, and moving it to the place they want it to be. Sometimes it's toggling on or off different types of data or information that they want to see. And sometimes it's as simple as giving them the ability to draw in VR so that they can draw not just on a sticky note, but in 3D over top of the design itself to properly communicate the change that they want to see.
Not only do we give our users the agency here, but as a developer, we have the ability to iterate so fast. If the user tells me that they need this console turned purple and moved over there, we can do that in our 3D tools. That allows us to understand what works, what doesn't, and what the user really needs. And then we can take it back to the stakeholders. We take it back to the decision makers and the technical experts, and we can show them that same experience because they're the ones who need to make the informed decision to get it to the field.
Now, last summer, we had a captain in the headset, we were giving a presentation to a captain, and we said, we were showing him all those versions of escalating fidelity that we had worked through. And he said, after the end of this presentation, he said, I see where you're going with this. I see why the warfighters are asking for many of the changes that you see here, including those floor-to-ceiling windows at the front. It's very different than what they have today. But he was like, I'm just not really sure that I think that we should commit to this. It's going to take a lot of effort to change the design this much. And I was sitting there and I said, well, sir, we have this VR headset, and we actually put the design in virtual reality. We would love it if you could take a few minutes and just walk around with it. Tell us what you think. So we put the VR headset on, and all of a sudden he said, wow, I understand this now. It makes a big difference, because now I can, from further back in the bridge, I can see everything that's happening around the ship. And it made a huge difference. And then all of a sudden, there was this magical moment where he started pulling on some of his past experiences. And he said, well, if I was standing here, then actually I would want access to. And then he started listing off all of these other things that we hadn't even heard about yet in the feedback process. So this is something that happens not just on this project, it happens all the time. And we love it when it does.
XR changes the conversation at every level of the design process. XR is an amazing storytelling tool, and now we can build empathy and see a different perspective that we couldn't before. It allows us to take an idea that's in one person's head and bring it to life, something that we can talk about and iterate on together. And then we can accelerate the feedback and iteration, driving that design forward. XR breaks down barriers between you, your users, and your stakeholders. That changes the conversation and allows us to build something that works together. So, the next time you have your big, unique idea,
how might XR change your conversations? Thank you. Yeah, we have some time for questions.
Hi there. I'm kind of curious, you went over essentially a lot of the UX process. I work in UX, but I also work in government. I'm kind of interested, what were some unique challenges you ran into working with Navy customers, getting access to those types of users?
Yes, so as a part of Tang, we are a part of the US Navy. And so our ability to reach them kind of depends on who we're working with. We've played off of kind of previous connections that we've had, but then also sometimes it's really about like getting access to the ships or various platforms that we're working on. And it really depends on, depending on like who you're working with or where you are. We've traveled all over the country to, as Kelles said earlier, like we try to meet them where they are, and we found that that's a lot easier. We've seen in the past that some teams will fly out people for feedback from across the country, but then you have to pay for their travel, you have to pay for a week of their time, pay for their flights and all of that. But when we pack our things up and go out to them, it makes a huge difference, because now we can say, give us an hour of your time and let's just show you something cool. And they come in and sometimes they're like, so is this like some sort of future concept? We don't even really know. We were told to be here, and we're like, let's show you. And by the end, then we're starting to collect this really good feedback, and then they can go back to their regular jobs. So yeah.
All right, thank you. I'm Alonzo Granville. I work at SAIC. I also work with establishing a fast virtual prototyping feedback loop. I'm wondering, we applies to multiple things, different areas. So how do you guys handle feedback? Because sometimes you can get too much feedback, can be incorrect. It can lead you down the wrong path. How do you guys handle that?
Yes, it is.
It's a good question.
It can be challenging. Our team loves to collect it all. We do a process that we call synthesis, where the slide that we had where there's all those stickies, we say if a good idea, it has to be on a sticky, or else it didn't happen. And so we'll put all of these on stickies and start to condense them down. And there's a process that we will go through of taking these anecdotes or the ideas and building them together into stories and then themes, so that then we can turn those themes into like, what does the sailor really need in order to accomplish that job? And so once we can target out those primary needs, then that's when we can start having the conversation about where do we want to go in the future.
And these sailors are so creative. They come up with so many good ideas. But sometimes, just like the example Wade gave with the wooden boxes that they made to see out of the window, sometimes it's about not just the idea that they're pitching, but the need behind it. And that's why we go through that synthesis process. It's a good question.
Hey, my name's Charles. I served in the Navy from 2004 to 2009. I was on a submarine. I actually just went and did a tour in Groton, Connecticut on Virginia. I was just wondering about clearances. Like, do you guys have to get clearances to learn all the systems and that kind of stuff?
Depends on the project.
I see.
Yeah, it depends on who we have or who we're working with. For some of the platforms, they have various levels of classification, so I guess I would say it depends, but in terms of like getting onto those platforms or accessing those systems, yes.
I see. Thank you.
I will say though, we try to stay as unclass as possible for things like development. It makes it so much easier when we're working with open source software from a developer's perspective. Keeping everything just like we would that we could show here at AWE, it makes it so much easier for us rather than having to take it away. Because as soon as we take off the internet connection and all of those things, now suddenly things start going out of date and it's a lot harder. So it really just depends, but we try to keep everything as easy to develop for as possible.
Hi. Came in late, so I wasn't completely aware as to specifically which departments or areas within the Navy that you all work with. I know that you said that Tang is a formal part of the Navy, but whenever you're collaborating with sailors, officers, et cetera, like, do you go through a medium of like the, what were they called? The mass spec folks, or I'm sorry, the mass communications, or like, do you work with like a specific subset of sailors to, deliver information around, or does it all come to you? Like, how do you handle that information?
Yes, so our stakeholders, primarily the people that we work with, sometimes they will say, hey, like, we're looking to solve this type of challenge. And then we will, if it really depends, because sometimes they're very focused, like they know who their target audience is. For something like the Surface Bridge project that we talked about here, it was a very large project. So for times like that, sometimes it takes reaching out to various commands to see like what sailors can we access, like really finding the right people. And other times it's a much smaller audience, so we kind of, it's a little bit easier to get everybody in the same room.
But when we work with a sponsor, we communicate frequently. We check in all of the time, and these experiences are really easy to share. If we can go to them or they can come to us, we can put them in the headset, and they can see exactly what we're working on. So it makes it really easy to communicate with them.
Okay, no worries. Can you hear me? All right. I'm curious, does this creation you make in XR, are you usually trying to solve problems related to spaces? Is that where it works best?
It depends. Usually, what we're trying to do is find the solution that works best for the warfighter. Sometimes that involves new spaces, and that's one of the easiest examples to give because it's so visual and we can put you into it, but not always. Sometimes it's about the information that warfighters need to have access to. Sometimes it's about all sorts of different things. So yeah.
Sometimes it's about the technology that they'll use in those spaces. Yeah. But the 3D examples like these are the best ones to share. All right, thank you very much. It's been great to be here. Thank you.